Welcome everyone to this week's Cat's Eye on the Future. This week we're going to resume our series of topical shows, and I'm going to build on the first show I did on a topic, which you can still listen to in the archives, and that one talks about just what the unseen world is, or what the other world is, as we may call it. In that previous show, I talked about what the unseen world is and the two ways most people tend to experience it. To quickly review that, the unseen world is composed of those places or dimensions that we don't normally experience with our usual five senses, but that many people do encounter either as a result of seeking to explore the unseen world or because they're naturally sensitive to it. This is a place that's sometimes called the other world, the land in the West, the place for the dream time. It has different names to different people, but basically I like the unseen world as kind of an overall word for those ideas and places. This week I'd like to build on that show, and I want to talk about how to protect yourself when encountering or learning about the unseen world, especially when you're first getting started. Now, this isn't because the unseen world is a particularly dangerous or spooky place any more than climbing a high mountain is. Mountains are a really earthly thing, and people have been climbing them probably for many, many thousands of years. But before going mountain climbing, whether it's now or 70,000 years ago, it's important to understand that there may be some dangers and pitfalls that you wish to avoid before you start climbing. Some things in mountain climbing you can prepare ahead for by reading books or studying with others who know how to climb mountains already. You can also go to a local mountain climbing supply store and buy proper equipment. You could join a mountaineering club. But if you're going mountaineering for the first time, or even if you're an experienced climber but you're going to a new place, you may want to have a guide to show you the best path, the places you want to stay away from, and even the most enjoyable spots and most interesting things to do. It's just generally a good idea to have a guide before you go. The unseen world is very similar in how we can learn to navigate and experience it safely. And probably the first tool you'll want to learn is called shielding. That's what I call it. Now, a lot of people call it warding, gaining protection. Sometimes it's referred to as creating a circle of light. It can be called a hammer hallowing. But basically, shielding is the process of learning to protect yourself and sometimes other people from unwanted contact or contacts that are not convenient for you in a particular time or place, especially in regards to the unseen world. Shielding is sometimes also used to help protect ourselves from things in the material world, but that sort of gets us into a different topic than the one we're talking about today. Today we're mostly talking about protecting ourselves in or around the unseen world. Now, everyone needs to know how to do this. You really do. Let's repeat that line again. Everyone needs to learn how to shield. Even if you believe yourself to be completely without any contact from the unseen whatsoever, that you're as psychic as a doorstop, that you have no interaction, it's a good idea and a good thing to learn. Why? Because metaphysics, like mainstream science, every action has a reaction. If you're exploring the unseen world at all, no matter how intellectually, no matter from how great a distance, no matter how separate you may feel, you're likely to call attention to yourself within it. Shielding helps allow you to explore it on your terms rather than on the terms of something that may be in the unseen world that maybe you'd really rather not wish to encounter right now. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything bad. It just is something that maybe you don't want to deal with at a particular time or place. Learning to protect yourself from unwanted forces does not mean you totally cut yourself off from psychic input. In fact, many shielding, sometimes called warding techniques, build into them invitations to various positive and selective contacts, though there are times when no contact whatsoever may be desired for a short period, such as when you're ill, grieving intently over something that's happened, or just during highly charged emotional periods when you may feel way too wide open already and really just not want to interact with things that you can't, that just are not mundane and right in front of you. It's even possible occasionally to shield for another person, but again, only for a brief period of time. When you're dealing with adults, this should only be done with permission or during a severe emotional or physical crisis. But it's perfectly acceptable to shield and protect, say, your own children, though most children seldom really need it. Children are often blessed with their own kind of natural forms of protection, but sometimes they may need a little help. And it's a wise parent who knows when to step in. Shielding others is a bit more difficult a skill for most people to learn than just learning to shield for yourself. The exception here is the most common type of community shielding in its traditional form of, say, religious prayers. This is where you're requesting a divinity, however you perceive divinity, to effectively do the shielding for you. If you believe in any form of the divine, this sort of protection is always there for you to request. However, it's not exactly the same thing as learning to throw a protective blanket around yourself or others. There are some traditions where prayers are used in the rituals towards accomplishing this protection and as a part of the package, but it's not, again, not quite the same thing as just regular, or regular is not a bad word, but just the act of prayer for protection. It's common to shield for a person also when doing it as a collective group, usually in the context of a particular ceremony or ritual. But this is a group that individuals are choosing to join together with their shields, and they make it stronger when they do this. So again, you're shielding with the other people, not shielding for them. It's all basically done with consent, and it's a little different. Prayer may be a part of it again, but it's a little bit different than just group prayer. It's basically each person extending their own shields to form this greater one that's linking together. Think of sort of like if you've ever seen a movie with the Saxon shield wall where all the men line up and they have their shields overlapping each other. That's kind of what this is. A related technique to the sort of shielding is the group sending of energy to do work such as a healing, or it's very similar in a way that it reaches out to others rather than shielding others. But it's best done after personal and group protection has already been invoked or achieved. While shielding is an important skill for everybody to learn, it's doubly or triply important for those of us that we talked about in the first show, for whom the unseen is already looking for. Remember, these are people who just, you don't have to go looking for the unseen because you're sensitive and it's already come looking for you. Shielding is very, very important for you. Now, tribal and traditional societies have long recognized the damage that can be done when someone who's unprepared or unprotected is just thrust impromptu into contact with the other world or the unseen world. This is the basic source of many tribal initiations and taboos, which a lot of Western sort of rational people find really quaint or even silly. But these traditions and these teachings, often done at puberty, served an important purpose within the context of these societies. And many of these older customs actually do have a great deal to teach Western metaphysical practitioners today. Basic protection ceremonies, such as smudging with sage before entering a sweat lodge, or refraining from lovemaking the night before a ritual hunt, as happens in many hunting societies, were designed to both ward and focus the mind for the individual's coming encounter with the unseen world. And yes, in hunting, it was also considered a magical as well as a physical act. It's known by modern science now that if you engage in marital intercourse before going out hunting, the animal you're hunting is more likely to smell you. So there really is in the physical world this mere reason, sort of common sense reason that people may have figured out as well, but it also gives this sort of psychic focus onto what you're doing. Another example would be the traditional blending of what Western people may consider the real and the magical worlds. Now, we talked about in the last show that a lot of traditional people don't really see a separation between to them it's all real. There's just different dimensions of the same world, which is a little hard for us Westerners often to get our heads around. But if you're lucky enough to come from a more traditional society, or have even a grandparent or someone who comes from that kind of society, you may find it a little easier to sort of understand. But in any case, you just sort of bear with me and accept that that's the case. Extremely experienced individuals, people who in a tribe are considered experts, sort of the medicine elder or the shaman, may be able to enter the unseen world without proper preparation or ceremony during an emergency. But they would hopefully only do this after years of study, and it's often at great spiritual or traditionally even physical danger to themselves. There are a lot of stories about people who, in defense of the tribe or in times of great, sudden disaster, will do this and at harm to themselves, and sometimes they even die in the process. So this is not something to be done lightly. And again, it's considered even more dangerous for someone who is not at all prepared or who does not specialize in this. Now, in modern times, the 20th century sleeping prophet, again, we talked about him before, Edgar Cayce, was told by his spiritual guides, and we'll talk about guides later, but he was told by his spiritual guides that if he did not stop conducting 4 trance sessions a day during World War II, he would soon physically die. Even so, the horrors of World War II and the desperation of people seeking his help caused him to continue to enter the unseen world repeatedly on their behalf. This is very much, again, like the traditional shaman, going in even when he knows it's a danger, but he feels a greater danger to the tribes if he does it anyway. Edgar Cayce did bring help and comfort to many people, but he also died a few weeks after that last warning. Previously, his guides had suggested that he might live to see 100 years of age if he was careful of his health, and traditionally helping more people along the way later. A modern tribal elder, he made the decision to sacrifice himself for what he saw as the good of his tribe, in this case, the people that he was helping throughout the world and the U.S. It was a noble act, but one that should be remembered when choosing to take on the role of priest, priestess, shaman, gothi, geithia, pythia, prophet, or whenever, particularly, not everybody walks into this with their eyes open, but it's something to consider that there are obligations here. You don't have to get really heavy about it, but you do need to think about these things. Good shields, however, can help protect against most of the really nasty side effects, particularly of early metaphysical or personal psychic studies. We're not all going to be at Cayce. We don't have to worry about that extreme a situation right now. So let's get back to the basics here. There are many other things we need to learn, but before we get there, but shielding is the foundation stone on which really everything is built. A note here, I want to sidetrack a bit. This is about natural shields. Most people on planet Earth have some natural shields, even if they're completely unconscious of their existence. Natural shields involve both the natural or the regular sort of hard reality world and the unseen worlds. And they allow humans to continue to function without the thousands of distractions we'd otherwise have in our daily existence. Babies learn very early to shift through what items of information are important to immediate needs. They can scream, "I'm hungry now," is an immediate need, and what is not. "I have nose." It may be interesting. We can play with our nose. We can touch our nose. But it's not nearly as urgent a concept to master as, "I'm hungry, darn it." Once you do know that you have a nose, you don't have to think about it a whole lot, unless there's a need for it, such as there's a bad smell warning you of something nasty, or you're having breathing problems like a bad cold. The same is true of natural psychic shields that all humans have. It protects us from remembering every dream we ever had. If we remembered them all, we'd never get anything done, such as the dishes. A lifesaver, this acceptance of the normal world also freed the mind of your direct ancestor to lick and run away from the saber-toothed tiger that had just wandered into his campfire while he was doing those same dishes. In other words, we have awareness on multiple levels, and our minds have these brilliant ways of being able to sort of tune down to what we need to see, particularly if we train it. Some people Often those exposed to early childhood psychic trauma, though, develop very strong natural shields. Stronger shields than they ever needed or really wanted, or may even probably realize they have. In fact, they're no longer really shields at all, because a shield is something a warrior holds up in his hand to deflect the blows from the enemy, like in that shield wall I talked about. Instead, when they have a giant stone walls or even fortresses, what you've got is a castle. And the castle cannot really live inside of themselves. It prevents them from seeing the world outside it. You can live in a castle, and castles become very important in later warfare, but say the problem is you get these little arrow slits that you see the world through, and it's not quite the same thing as standing out right out in where everything is. This sort of shield, though, is a naturally occurring cousin to the egg exercise, which you can find on my website. Only it's an involuntary and unmovable sort of wall. These sorts of natural shields, that when they're too strong, usually result from some childhood or adolescent trauma. And this can be a physical something, it can be a mental experience, it can be psychic, or it could be a combination. These sorts of shields are not developed by human minds without reason. And trust me, it is extremely dangerous to try to drag them down all at once. Most people have no idea if they have them, and having them knocked out directly, as can happen during a severe illness or accident, can open a floodgate that the person isn't ready for. Now, a good mental health professional is trained to help people cope with the shocks that occur when the mental shields and blocks come tumbling down. They may even know how to help break them apart, but they're trained for it. And unless you are, please don't try to do this with someone else, especially if you're forming a little group of people, as often happens, to get together and explore the unexplained. Don't try this on each other. And even for yourself, if you find that you have these really severe, difficult shields that are, natural sort of walls that you can't break down, this is some place where you may want to get help beyond which you're going to get on this radio show. On the other hand, things like doing my egg exercise, that is not actually mine. I learned that like 30 years ago from one of my first teachers. It's very common, and it floats around all over the place in the metaphysical world. It's perfectly safe. Asking for protection is never going to harm you. But trying to actually knock things down can be difficult. Now, a trained metaphysical practitioner can aid a person who knows they have such walls and wishes to lower them. Or if the other thing that can happen is you can sort of have them blown apart by life accident. We talked about that again in the previous show, gave the example of St. Francis of Assisi, who is a perfectly normal young man. He's a warrior. He comes back from war. He gets very ill. And he wakes up, suddenly just completely open to, the unseen world and talking to animals and everything. But again, the word here is someone who's trained, is the type of person you need to help you if you go through something like that. Most people, it's not as dramatic as it is with St. Francis. But again, a life shock can do this. And this is when you may morph from someone who may never not even thought about the unseen to someone who the unseen comes looking for. Now, even for a trained person to help you, there's a certain risk, and it's not exactly easy. If someone you love or yourself are in the middle of this sort of crisis, please, again, don't try to deal with it on your own if you can avoid it. If you're isolated and you're the one it's happening to, just do the egg exercise and start to try to rebuild some of the walls of your own choosing, or rather your shields of your own choosing. But don't try to accelerate the wall climbing process. Let it happen gradually. Most of metaphysical work is learning to be in control of what's happening to you, sometimes with a little outside help, rather than letting what's happening control you, either again from the inside or the outside. I know that's a little complicated, but the good news is we are not without help. In the second part of the show, we'll talk about some of those helpers. You have been listening to part 1 of Cat's Eye on the Future. We'll return to the show right after these short messages. Do you have questions?
The cards have answers. If you would like a personal reading with Melody, just go to my website, melodipsychicreadings.com. That's Melody with an I, psychicreadings.com for information, or email me at melodyreader@gmail.com. Readings are available using Skype, phone, email, or even in person if you are lucky to live in Ireland. Why not find out what special messages the cards have just for you and book a private reading today?
We now return to part 2 of Cat's Eye on the Future. Now we're going to talk about some of the help we can get. We're not on our own, not even just in the physical world, but also in the spiritual world. We can get help while we navigate it. I've labeled this section Totem, Animal Helpers, and Allies in the Unseen World, and that's pretty much what this is about. When you start to explore the unseen world, we've already talked about shielding and prayer, but there are groups in the unseen world that are talked about in a lot of popular literature. You see this a lot in fantasy, that are beings that are out there that can help us, but they're often really poorly explained and not properly understood. While there can be some crossover between them, they're usually different types of beings doing slightly different jobs. So I'm going to go over them one at a time and sum up the similarities and differences. Now, you're probably, to be honest, not going to encounter this early. You're probably going to, want to do your egg exercises first and some of the other things. But basically, when you start really experiencing the unseen world, getting in touch and understanding these different entities is a really good idea. Now, the first one that people talk about a lot is a personal totem. You can see this, for example, and sometimes they're family totems. But a personal totem would be an animal who a person feels represents their most inner self. In my case, it's a cat. In my husband's case, it's a wolf. Not everybody knows who their animal is, but that's basically what it is. Sometimes this animal self is pretty obvious to the person, or at least to all their friends. To quote one observer, "Some people have totems that wear them more obviously than others," referring to a lady who looked, acted, and often sounded more like a white Persian cat than a person, and that wasn't me, by the way. She even had a purple velvet cushion in her room and a red ribbon for her hair, and eventually went and made a catnip mouse to hang in her car. Most people aren't quite that obvious, but may have a favorite animal or two they feel drawn to or identify with. It's not necessary to know for sure what your totem animal is at all, and not even all traditions or people that work in this field recognize them as such, but it's something many newcomers ask about and want to explore. It's all over popular literature. Now, to find your own totem, think about what animals you're drawn to, and also read about how animals relate to their world. You may start to recognize yourself as you read about running wolves, solitary pumas, or soaring eagles. Don't worry if nothing happens right away. Personal totems do have some crossover into the next category I'm going to call animal allies, and sometimes they can be difficult to tell apart at first. Just give it time and it will become clear. There are common and safe ways to search out personal totems that do not have to involve the long fast or tribal vision quests that, while very powerful, these techniques should only be done under the direct guidance of a trained guide. Remember, we talked about guides as people as well as astral guides, and that's very important here. A lot of traditional groups do have basically totem quests, but I would caution people to make sure that if you go on something like this, a person who's leading them really knows what they're doing. In other words, get some feedback from people who've been through the experience first. Now, a really simple way of trying to contact your totem is the safe way that we've talked about with dreams. Before you go to sleep at night, ask that your totem speak to you or show themselves to you. Then keep the dream journal, which I talked about a little bit before and we'll talk about in the future, where you just keep a notebook by your bed and try to record your dreams for several weeks. You can also give yourself the same sort of suggestions after you do meditations, if you do a regular morning or evening meditation. And then again, just kind of leave it and see what comes. Then there is my husband's favorite exercise for sort of outing the inner familiar within you. Now, this one is perfectly safe, and I will describe it here. It takes 2 people to do, and it's kind of fun for small groups of explorers to perform on each other. It works best when only the person directing the exercise knows what's going on, but it can work if you actually listen to this program. It won't always tell you the exact animal your totem is, but this exercise can give you a clue the sort of general size and types of reactions. Now, I call this Kveldorfer's personal totem finding exercise. Now, you have 2 people sit facing each other on the floor, or to same height chairs if the floor is not an option. If you're with a group, have everybody sort of sit around them in a circle. It's important for both people to be of level height, and neither to be in a dominant body language position over the other. One person has already been chosen to be the totem tester, the other person is the testee. If the group is sitting together around them, they can pair up and take turns testing each other. But I think it's kind of more fun if you just kind of the 2 people take it at one at a time. And the test is very simple. Have the tester just talk to the testee about just about anything under the sun, except what they think their totem is. In other words, you want the person to relax, and this would be actually a reason why you might not want to do this as part of the group. You could go up and separate. This is a time when it's perfectly safe. This is not something that has to be done, in a worded magical circle necessarily. But just generally talking about totems is fine, but the idea is to get the testee to relax and be slightly off guard. When the tester feels the testee is at least somewhat distracted by the conversation, he should take their hand and strike it out into the air right in front of the testee's face. In other words, take your hand and go like that. Slap your fingers, or what you want to be is quick but careful. Don't actually hit the person. Just go at them like you're going to go at them. You don't want to hurt anybody or be hurt yourself, which is why the tester should then jump back immediately, because some people have very quick reflexes and should not be the testers. What you want to do is startle the testee into a natural defensive reaction. What you don't want is them to overreact. But the reaction and the testee's feeling about it, which you talk to them immediately afterwards, you say, how do you feel? Can help point to the sort of totem they have. If there's a discussion of totems beforehand, it's not uncommon for a person to even make the vocal sounds their animal might make when you come at them. And again, I mentioned you just kind of go at them, because even if you don't get a direct hit, when you might get a bit too close. But in terms of the responding animal, you may get some really good ideas of who or what they probably are. For example, when my husband tested me, I was pretty sure I was a cat of some type, but I wasn't sure what sort of cat. I wasn't even completely sure that there even was a cat. I just thought it probably was. He did this to me in the middle of a conversation about something totally different, and I reacted by throwing my paw at his paw and growling. Typical cat response, but even more interesting, a typical big cat response. A little cat is more likely to jump back to avoid being hit and hiss at the threat. Now, a bear might charge and growl or come, at the person with both hands. A wolf might try to snap and try to grab the hand coming at them. A small bird will want to take flight, and even if the person doesn't physically get up, they can feel like they want to fly away. An inner elephant or moose might just sit there and step aside, or just kind of move away from the offending object that is like an insect to them. A boar or a sow is likely to put their head down into charge mode. A horse is going to startle and possibly whinny. You get the idea. In a word, predators are going to tend to fight back. Plant eaters, unless they are very large, will jump back or try to run. And birds, fish, or reptiles will tend to fly, swim, or slither away, again depending on size. Now, snakes might strike, but are more likely to hiss than to growl at the sudden danger. After the initial reaction, it's important to question the testee as to what they were feeling at the exact moment they reacted. Since finding a totem is a personal thing, this personal response is very, very important. Nothing is too silly or weird to bring up. Most animals, wild or domestic, have been viewed as totems at one time or another, and often they have very powerful characteristics when seen through another culture's eyes. My favorite example of this is a lady who was worried when she kept getting images of a large doe-eyed cow when she meditated on her totem. Thinking of modern milk cows, she thought this meant she was fat, slow, and dumb. She had no idea the great importance that cattle and their relatives have played in tribal societies from Africa to Asia. The fact that her totem was a big cow meant it could even be an Arug, or the fierce cattle painted on the cave walls 30,000 years ago in Europe, with little tiny people surrounding them. These were powerful, strong animals, defensive and loyal to others in their herd, that would form circles and lower their heads when attacked, work together. They were not traits of a barnyard, sort of modern barnyard cattle by any means. Even they, though, do have still some of these characteristics. And if you've ever seen a herd of cattle spook, and I have cattle often right outside practically my door, you can see the hints of the ancient ways that cattle worked. Now, this isn't not to mention that many people, including the ancient Germans, saw cattle as wealth. The rune fehu actually, it means cattle, although we usually translate it as wealth today. Now, this is just one example, but it shows how no one should worry about looking silly or being laughed at. If you have a third person at this exercise or a group, have them take notes or use a recorder, so the testee will have a record of those first thoughts and inner feelings. Thoughts of running away like a deer, or feeling like soaring away, or hissing are important clues. But they're easy to dismiss, and they tend to fade from memory if not recorded directly. While this works best for first person being tested in a group, it's surprisingly how well it can still work, even when the person being tested, the next one, knows it's going to happen, as long as the tester calls the moment right. If it doesn't work, don't worry about it. Talk about dreams, meditations, etc. Later sessions can involve a sort of group-guided meditation to look for totems or spirit allies. I had some very powerful experiences when someone did something like this on a guided meditation, and it was really intense. Some people find this sort of guided meditation journey works better than the direct confrontation or totem exercise. And it's certainly the way to go if you have like a group of more than probably 5 or 6 people, because but again, you need somebody with a little bit of experience who can read or go through the totem exercise with you if you're going to use the meditation technique. This is because people and totems are different, and there's no one-size-fits-all solution that works for everyone. But to sum up on this part, a totem is basically your personal animal, sort of what makes the one that resonates the closest to you. And that in some ways, it's like you are part of that animal, and that animal is part of you. Not everyone even really feels like they have a totem. Again, it's just not something. It's something that if you feel really drawn to, this is how you would look. If it doesn't feel like something that really draws to you, then just don't worry about it. But everyone should be aware of something called animal allies, which is our next topic. Well, totems are your own inner animal. Animal allies are animal spirits that live in the unseen world, who may be called upon to guide you in your travels and experiences, well, especially while you're walking there. This is particularly important if you want to explore things like deep meditation and, say, even astral traveling or something. Many traditions stress having the animal allies there to protect you. There are groups that also traditions may work with angels or other beings, but we're going to stick with animals for right now, because they're probably the oldest that we know of these beings from talking with traditional cultures. Now, these animal allies may come to your aid in the course of normal life as well. Guiding involves teaching as well as aiding, but don't always accept at face value. There are some animal spirits, like the Native American coyote or the Northern European fox, who are famed for sort of helping people get into tighter spots than they already were in order to teach them. Most of the time, though, things work out in the end, but the learning experience is not always without pain. So again, this little caveat that just because it's an animal ally and just because it's out there doesn't mean you have to listen to everything it says directly without using your brain. The beings that are the most, that you would be a little bit concerned about, are generally referred to as tricksters. And they can sometimes be human in appearance as well as animal. But some of the common trickster animals from various world traditions are coyote, fox, rabbit, raven, monkey, and snakes. Almost all allies can appear as the trickster if the circumstances is right, but the above 5 are the ones to really watch out for. They don't always mean they're the trickster, but they can. Now, if one of these animals is your personal totem, you can probably trust them a bit more, but caution is still suggested. Over time, you'll learn the difference between your personal fox and the fox that may be trying to outsmart your personal fox. Like most tasks worth learning, this takes practice. And again, that's another reason for learning good meditation and personal shielding exercises. The shielding being first. We'll probably talk about meditation in a different show, or I may even get a guest to talk about it if that's possible. This confusion is partly because of the difference between animal allies, who are beings you may meet or identify with, who seem to be the individual spirits who take an interest in you, and the more universal concept of the spirit of the bear. They're different things. One is an individual who may guide and befriend you, sort of a spirit being who is a bear of some sort who takes an interest in you. The other is in some ways its own totem of the entire species. This would be like mother bear or father elephant, this type of thing. Well, both types of relationship can be very powerful and useful in understanding the unseen, as well as sometimes the seen worlds. The rare appearance of the elk or grandmother tortoise are something to sit up and pay close attention to. That doesn't happen as often as sort of individual beings who seem to be spirit animals seem to occur. Now, if you receive such a visit in dreams, in vision, or meditation, you are much more likely to be visited by the totem spirit of your totem animal, aka the wolf wants to talk to you, my wolfkin. So if you do experience this kind of, visit from the other world, very often it is, I might get the spirit of the cat. However, sometimes these species totems may want to give you a message directly, even if you don't recognize a kinship with them. So maybe grandfather tortoise does have something to say to you. Messages such as, even though you are a human hunter and therefore our destiny, grandmother deer wants you to know that the land is drying up and that we will not be plentiful this year, are highly important even if you don't understand them right away. This would be the kind of thing that might come to tell a shaman or medicine elder who was, asking about the deer, or in a dream, the grandmother deer might come to explain this to him to tell the hunters that there wouldn't be a lot of deer next year. This sort of message might seem strange to us, but if you're, again, this tribal hunter whose family depends on the meat you bring home, getting a warning that the deer aren't going to be few can be the foundation of life and death decisions. You may decide to go someplace else to do your hunting that next summer because, game that may be a little more difficult to catch is more likely to be there. And this is probably both good for the human tribe and the deer tribe, which is why the deer has come and talked to you. Most modern versions of this sort of message have been reported with the various animal spirits and animal totem spirits warning humans that the natural world was out of balance, that a particular species was in danger of extinction. This has been happening. I don't want to get political here, but that seems to be one of the ways that in modern times recently that humans are sometimes included, in this sort of overall message that they're being given. Now, humans are sometimes also in the possible extinction category, so such warnings should always be verified by more than one divination or exercise, but I think we ignored them kind of at our own personal and collective peril. When a lot of people are getting the same message, it's probably something to pay attention to, especially if it's a particular animal spirit or overall species spirit that keeps coming to different people and keeps saying, look, we're in danger, it may be something to pay attention to. That's kind of a little off track, but it's something you can watch for as you get to know more people who do this sort of work. Back to the subject. The more typical sort of animal ally is a spirit animal who befriends and guides you, but is not your personal totemic spirit necessarily. In fact, it probably isn't. Sometimes called animal helpers, they may change over the course of a lifetime as you can encounter new experiences during your life journey. Basically, your totem doesn't change, but your animal helpers may. These individual animals may first show up in your dreams, your meditations, or even a shamanic journey or an astral journey. On occasion, they've even been individual members of your totem species, especially if your totem is an animal that likes company of its own kind, such as wolves, lions, or elks, cows. More often, they're animal spirits that just simply like you and that you have an affinity for, but that are not your totem species. They frequently appear when you're working on a problem that involves their element. So if you're trying to learn wisdom, you may find a raven coming to help you. If you're planning a long journey at sea, either physical or spiritual, you may get a salmon or a dolphin. A horse might take you on a spiritual ride when you're worn out, etc. This sort of idea. Some allies you may only encounter once, and others may become frequent friends and visitors. And you know, there, like I said, there is some overlap there with angels and some of the other guides. You can have humans or even sometimes deities may sort of take the place of an ally, but basically that gives you one type. And I think the animal allies tend to be, for the most part, a little safer to approach in the beginning, particularly for people who are just starting out. They're incredibly ancient in their traditional uses, or not uses exactly, but in how they interact with human beings. And again, while nothing like this is ever totally safe, as long as you're shielded and you're asking in good faith, generally, particularly if you stick to things like dreams and meditations at the beginning, or the simple exercise I game, you're likely to find that you have you find both your totem, or at least some really good animal friends that can help you when you may have some issues with the unseen world. Now, finally, we're going to talk about on this show family fetches, because we're just going to mostly stick to the animals here. Another show will deal with some of the other beings. And family fetches are the last category of frequently found spirit animals in that it's related to totems, and the word fetch is sometimes used interchangeably to your personal inner animal. You know, such as my totem is a bear, and my fetch may be a bear. But in some traditions, particularly the Norse and the Celtic, also have fetches which said to guard entire families or family lines. And this is the type of fetch I'm talking about. Think of them as an animal form of mighty ancestor, and you will have the right idea. Not all families have them. In fact, they're most often associated with lines of kings, nobles, or important clans. Sometimes the fetch is a powerful supernatural animal, such as a dragon or a hippogriff. Most often, it's a powerful warrior sort of animal, sort of a bear, wolf, battle boar, or eagle. Traditionally, fetches would appear as portents of great events in clan history, such as the birth or the death of a king, or to warn of dangers like a pestilence, war, or famine. While fetches may interfere or aid a individual family member, their interests and purposes are to protect the family as a whole, as a general rule. If your family has a tradition of an animal guardian, respect it and listen for warnings and advice. They tend to only show up when there's a great need, and this link may be even stronger for people whose personal totem animal is the same as a family fetch. I think the best example that we have of fetches in popular culture are in Game of Thrones, both the books and the TV show, where you have, you know, the wolves of the Starks, and you have the lions of the Lannisters, and the krakens of the Sea People. And this is not just their heraldry, but this is very definitely a family fetch. And someone like, say, Jon Snow, who probably is actually a wolf with his totem as well, is going to have a really, really strong connection. Whereas someone in the family who may not actually, their fetch might be their personal totem may be something else, might not have quite as strong a link there. but that gives you a really good idea of what a fetch is. And like I said, these are not not the only sorts of spirit animals, but they're the most common ones you're going to encounter as you begin to read about the unseen world. And as I said, they're some of the easiest and the most approachable and safest of the guides you could start looking for. So again, remember your safest ways to look for them are dreams, suggestions for dreaming before going to bed, meditations, the exercise for finding the totem animal, and in the case of allies in particular, just sort of asking and maybe even wearing a necklace or something, having a tattoo, whatever makes you feel close to either your totem animal or your allied animals that you find the most helpful. A family fetch you may or may not ever have or experience other than from a distance, or you may recognize it when other people see it. But now that you know of these things' existence, all three of them, you can keep a watch out for them in your life and the lives of others. And I think for now, that's probably a pretty good intro. On another show, when we have more time, I'll go into some of the other types of guides and also some of the other beings you're likely to encounter if you continue to explore the unseen world. But for now, I think that's all for this show. I'd like to thank everyone for being here, and I look forward to seeing you next time at Cat's Eye on the Future. You have been listening to Cat's Eye on the Future, the show where we take a look at what's coming up in your world and your future. Join us again next time for another episode of Cat's Eye on the Future.